Our story begins in the communications room on Mandalore, where Mace Windu had just told Ahsoka that the end of the war would depend on the Chancellor. Ahsoka asks what Mace means by this, and Mace declines to tell her any further information, just like the original timeline. However, when the other council members leave, Yoda asks Ahsoka if there is anything else on her mind. Ahsoka thinks about waiting to see Anakin until she gets it out, but in this timeline, seeing the compassion in Master Yoda's eyes, she decides not to. She tells Yoda about Maul's visions about Anakin's turn to the dark side of the Force. Yoda tells Ahsoka that Maul has been blinded by the dark side, and says that his ways are the ways of chaos and deception, very similar to what he said to Obi-Wan and Mace about Dooku at the end of Attack of the Clones. Ahsoka disagrees with this and argues that Maul seemed convinced that he was telling the truth. Yoda is skeptical and disregards Ahsoka's words, but remembering his earlier conversation with Anakin about his nightmares, he decides to take precautions just in case Ahsoka turned out to be right. Yoda thanks Ahsoka before kindly telling her to complete her mission and bring Maul to the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. Ahsoka bows to Yoda respectfully and the call ends. Yoda, after ending the call with Ahsoka, informs Tarful and Chewbacca that he would be leaving for Coruscant immediately. The Wookiees say their goodbyes to their little green friend and wish him well on his journey before Yoda hops into his Jedi Starfighter and takes off. Before jumping into hyperspace, Yoda contacts Mace Windu and informs him of what Ahsoka had said, and that he is swiftly returning to Coruscant, ordering the Master of the Order to contact him immediately if anything happens with Anakin and his assignment to spy on the Chancellor. Mace is reluctant, but obliges, and ends the call before Yoda jumps into hyperspace. Meanwhile, Anakin goes to Palpatine's office, and Palpatine reveals his true identity as a Sith Lord, just like the original timeline. Anakin tells Palpatine that he is going to turn him over to the Jedi Council, and he tells Mace about his findings. In this timeline, Mace, knowing that Yoda was on his way to Coruscant and realizing that Ahsoka was right all along, decides to wait until the Grand Master returns. When Anakin and Mace return to the Jedi Temple, Mace immediately contacts Yoda and informs him of the situation. Yoda, still in hyperspace, is noticeably distressed. However, he remains calm and sends Kit Fisto and Agen Kolar to get proof of conversations with Dooku in order to convince the Senate of their findings. Once Yoda returns, he, Mace, and Saesee Tiin would move on the Chancellor. Yoda also invites Anakin to come on the mission. Yoda would feel the conflict within the boy, and sensing that Ahsoka may have been telling the truth, he felt that the best way to deal with it would be to have Anakin there with them. Mace is initially very skeptical of this, but he is forced to accept it. After the call with Yoda ends, Anakin contacts Padme and informs her of the situation. He also tells her about Palpatine's promise to help save her from his visions, but Padme isn't so sure. She tells Anakin that if Palpatine truly was the Sith Lord, then not only is he the one behind the war, but he is also the one who is responsible for the attempts on her life. Then, wanting to help Anakin through his troubles, Padme tells Anakin that if he decides to go down this path with Palpatine, then she could no longer be with him, because the dark path was a path that she could not follow. She then ends the call, informing Anakin that she would help the Jedi gather the evidence needed to convict Palpatine. When Yoda returns to Coruscant, an emergency council meeting is held, where Mace and Anakin explain everything. The council is nothing short of shocked, and chaos fills the council chambers. Yoda taps the floor with his walking stick, signaling the council members to calm down. However, Ki-Adi-Mundi proposes that they immediately move on the Chancellor and kill him if necessary. Mace agrees, anxious to end Palpatine's reign, but Yoda and Obi-Wan do not. Yoda says that they still have to wait for the proof of the Chancellor's conversations with Dooku to come from Kit Fisto and Agen Kolar. However, Kit and Agen state the unfortunate information that the conversations must have been erased from Dooku's communication devices. This further encourages Ki-Adi-Mundi and Mace's opinion to arrest or kill Palpatine immediately. But Plo Koon, who was nearly finished with his campaign on Cato Neimoidia, recounts that Maul was facing execution for his crimes against the galaxy, and suggests that they use Maul as a witness against Palpatine at his trial in exchange for a lighter sentence. Obi-Wan is instantly skeptical of this, but Yoda agrees, as do the rest of the council. The council meeting is adjourned just before the Jedi Temple Guards show up, informing the council that Ahsoka had arrived with Maul. Yoda orders the Temple Guards to escort Ahsoka and Maul to the Temple prison, where they would speak with Maul about their proposition. Before going to the Temple prison, Obi-Wan, over hologram and having just destroyed General Grievous, has a conversation with Anakin, asking him if he is alright. Anakin puts his head down, and Obi-Wan, sensing the fear within his apprentice, tells Anakin that he did the right thing by telling the council. Then, Obi-Wan, sensing that Anakin needs his help, informs Anakin that he is to come back to Coruscant immediately to help. Anakin smiles softly before setting off for the Temple prison. Once Maul is secure in a Temple prison cell, Ahsoka has the opportunity to speak with Anakin, and she feels the fear that Anakin still possesses because of the possibility of losing Padme. Ahsoka tells Anakin what Maul had said to her before their duel on Mandalore. Anakin, due to the recent events, is immediately shocked, but, due to the revelation of Palpatine being a Sith Lord, instantly believes her, thanking her for the information. Ahsoka then leaves the Jedi Temple to return to her normal civilian life. However, this time, Anakin is at peace with Ahsoka's departure from the Order. At this moment, it was clear now to Anakin that Palpatine didn't really care about him. It was clear that Palpatine just wanted to use him for his own personal gain and for his sinister plans. He had ordered the attacks on Anakin's wife, sent Maul to kill Qui-Gon Jinn when he was a boy, manipulated Anakin for over 10 years, and created and prolonged the Clone War, all in the name of gaining power all to himself. Whenever Yoda, Mace, Saesee, and Anakin moved on Palpatine, Anakin decided that he would end Palpatine's reign of terror himself. When Anakin goes into the prison cell, he sees that Maul had been released, and that Yoda, Mace, and Plo had their lightsabers pointed directly at Maul's throat. Maul would angrily demand to know what the Jedi wanted from him. The Jedi tell Maul that they know that the Chancellor of the Republic is the Sith Lord Darth Sidious, and tell Maul that if he were to testify at Palpatine's trial, then he would be given a lighter sentence, rather than be punished with execution for his crimes. Maul thought about it for a long moment, and remembering how Sidious had murdered his brother, tortured him aboard Dooku's ship, and used him to destroy Mother Talzin, he decides to accept the Jedi's proposition. After all, this would be the perfect chance for Maul to take his revenge against Sidious for what he had done to his family. After Maul's conversation with the Jedi, Maul is locked back into his cell, and after Mace, Yoda, Saesee, and Anakin discuss strategy, Obi-Wan returns and volunteers to help in the arrest of the Chancellor. Everyone agrees, and Anakin thanks Obi-Wan for being there. Obi-Wan puts his arm around Anakin's shoulder, telling him that he would always be there for his young apprentice. Obi-Wan pats Anakin on the shoulder before the 5 Jedi move for the Chancellor's office. As Palpatine senses the Jedi approaching his office, he felt Anakin's presence alongside them. When he felt that there was no more conflict within Anakin, Palpatine was immediately concerned. He had no time to react, however, as Yoda, Obi-Wan, Mace, Saesee, and Anakin entered Palpatine's office, immediately igniting their lightsabers. In the original timeline, since Anakin wasn't there initially, and Yoda and Obi-Wan were off-world, the only Jedi to be able to hold a candle to Palpatine was Mace Windu. But in this timeline, Palpatine is stuck. He could deal with Saesee easily, but the other Jedi were among the most powerful Jedi in the Order. So, Palpatine decided on a move that wasn't the most comfortable, but could still work. Palpatine, in a move that stunned everyone in the room, ignited one of his lightsabers and threw it at Saesee with lightning speed. Saesee, unable to react in time, is stabbed in the heart by Palpatine's weapon, killing him instantly as Palpatine blasts the other Jedi with his Sith lightning. The Jedi deflect the lightning as Palpatine uses his free hand to grab his lightsaber with the Force, taking the blade out of Saesee's chest and guiding the blade towards the window. The blade breaks the window and Palpatine summons his lightsaber to his hand as he escapes out the window. The Jedi attempt to rush after him, but by the time they get to the window to see where the Dark Lord went, they realize that he had escaped, as he was nowhere to be seen. Mace, having been skeptical of Yoda's plan, was now uneasy at this realization. Mace even told Yoda that had Mace gone to arrest Palpatine earlier, it would have ended the war. Yoda, in response, calmly says that if Mace had done this, then the Sith Lord would have accelerated his plans. Anakin attempts to feel the location of Palpatine with the Force, but he couldn't feel his bond with Palpatine any longer. All he felt was a dark void in the Force where Darth Sidious used to be. Suddenly, though, Anakin, Obi-Wan, Yoda, and Mace feel a dark disturbance in the Force overcome them, as thousands of Jedi across the galaxy are killed. Immediately, Yoda senses that they must return to the Jedi Temple, and the Jedi instantly leave as Anakin contacts R2-D2, asking him to discreetly go to the Jedi Temple and record everything he sees. Meanwhile, Palpatine, having escaped through the window, landed on a nearby speeder, and commandeered the vehicle by killing the driver with his crimson lightsaber as the driver screamed in horror. Palpatine then masked his presence in the Force, as he then contacted every single clone commander in the galaxy, telling them to execute Order 66. He also contacts the Coruscant Guard and the 501st, and orders them to attack the Jedi Temple to leave no survivors and to rescue Maul from his prison. With Maul brought to justice and Ahsoka back to civilian life, Rex is able to be a part of the attack on the temple. Within an instant, thousands of Jedi across the galaxy are killed by their clone commanders. Palpatine also joins the Coruscant Guard and the 501st in their attack on the Jedi Temple, cutting down every Jedi who dared to stand against him with pure ferocity as he moved for the temple prison. When he gets to the temple prison cell where Maul is being held, guarded by 4 temple guards, everyone except Palpatine is taken completely by surprise as one of the temple guards, the future Grand Inquisitor, suddenly betrays his own brethren, cutting one of them down instantly as Palpatine kills the other 2 with ruthless efficiency. Maul is consumed by fear as the Grand Inquisitor opens the cell doors. However, Palpatine offers Maul to return to his side as his apprentice. Maul, enraged after everything Palpatine had done, summons the lightsaber of a fallen temple guard, and another duel begins. Maul is able to hold his own, but after some time, Palpatine defeats him, and Maul surrenders, deciding to accept Palpatine's offer and becoming Darth Maul once again. Immediately, Maul bleeds the kyber crystals of the lightsaber he had just used against Palpatine, before the 2 Sith Lords and the newly formed Inquisitorius step outside of the temple as the carnage concludes. Then, in a stunning display of the dark side of the Force, Palpatine uses the Force to destroy the Jedi Temple as it explodes alongside everything in it after the clones leave the scene, including Rex and Fox. After the temple's destruction, Palpatine again uses the Force to unveil a Sith temple hidden under the grounds where the Jedi Temple used to be, as it rises from the ground. Obi-Wan, Yoda, Mace, and Anakin arrive, horrified at the destruction wrought by the Sith, but they ignite their lightsabers, prepared for battle. The Sith and Inquisitorius ignite their own lightsabers, and a battle of epic proportions begins. Yoda and Mace duel with Palpatine whilst Obi-Wan duels with Maul, and Anakin duels with the Inquisitors, outnumbered 14-1. This time, Maul wishes to prove himself truly worthy to be a Sith Lord. But his fight with Kenobi is ferocious, and Obi-Wan has the upper hand as he continues to fight. Sidious is ultimately able to separate Yoda from Windu, using the Force to push him down the stairs as he uses his Force lightning. Yoda tries to get up, but is caught off guard when the Grand Inquisitor attacks him. Anakin duels with each of the Inquisitors and defeats every single one of them with ease, before the Grand Inquisitor suddenly attacks Yoda. Anakin rushes to help as Maul is suddenly able to find a weak spot in Obi-Wan's defenses and uses the Force to push him into Anakin. Maul then helps his master against Mace, who had originally gained the upper hand against Sidious. However, the fight quickly turns in the Sith's favor, and Mace is overpowered and killed by Sidious and Maul's combined strength. Obi-Wan and Anakin recover just in time to see this happen, and Obi-Wan rushes back into his duel with Maul, just as Yoda is able to finish off the Grand Inquisitor. Anakin rushes Sidious, using his anger for what Palpatine had done and attempting to groom him into a Sith apprentice. Yoda joins Anakin, and it looks like Sidious is outmatched as Obi-Wan switches to Qui-Gon's fighting style Ataru, similarly to what he did in Star Wars Rebels, and he is ultimately able to kill Maul in battle, slashing him across the chest. Sidious, feeling a rush of anger, uses Force Lightning against both Yoda and Anakin, and it knocks both of them down the temple stairs and unconscious. Obi-Wan prepares himself, switching back to his preferred use of Form 3 Surisu. However, Sidious is a master of all 7 forms of lightsaber combat, and he is able to overwhelm Obi-Wan very quickly. Anakin wakes up first, and he tends to Yoda, breathing a sigh of relief when he realizes that Yoda is still alive. However, he turns towards the fight between Obi-Wan and Sidious and sees the horrifying sight of Sidious's crimson lightsaber stabbing Obi-Wan through the heart, as Obi-Wan looks towards his apprentice and whispers to Anakin to do what he must. Sidious withdraws the blade from Obi-Wan's chest, and he dies before he hits the ground. Anakin screams in anger on behalf of his former master, and he engages Sidious in the most ferocious battle that the galaxy had ever seen. Lightsaber strikes and Force blows are traded in this spectacular duel. Anakin, at one point, uses the Force to send a giant boulder at Sidious, but Sidious uses his lightning to destroy it, just as Anakin reactivates his weapon and goes for another strike. Sidious blocks, and he continues to taunt Anakin, telling him that his beloved Padme would die because of his decision to side with the Jedi, and giving him one last chance to join the dark side. However, Anakin, knowing that this is just another trick of the Sith, refuses and continues to push Sidious backwards. The battle exhausts both Sidious and Anakin, and at the climax of the battle, Sidious exclaims that soon the Jedi would be a distant memory, and that he would come for Anakin's children once he was done with him, as he prepares to throw his lightsaber with deadly intent. Suddenly, Anakin hears the voice of Qui-Gon Jinn telling him that this was what he was born for, that this was his destiny, and to see that destiny fulfilled here and now. Anakin realizes that Qui-Gon is right. This isn't just another duel to win. This isn't another fight against battle droids. In fact, this wasn't just a normal battle. This was Anakin's fight. This was Anakin's destiny, and it was calling to him like a werewolf mother calling to her alpha. So, without hesitation, Anakin calms his mind, focusing on the Force in this moment, as his life flashes right before his eyes. He remembers Obi-Wan, the man who was like a brother to Anakin, and he remembered how much he loved him as such. Then, when Anakin opens his eyes, he sees Sidious' lightsaber heading straight for his face. He moves forward, sliding underneath the strike as quick as a flash, using the love that he had for Obi-Wan instead of his anger with Palpatine. and with a swift movement, he stabs Sidious in the heart just like he did to Obi-Wan. Sidious gasps in shock as Anakin says, "This is for Obi-Wan." Anakin swiftly pulls the lightsaber from Sidious's dark heart as the Sith Lord falls dead. For a moment, it is quiet, but then Yoda enters the scene, having witnessed Anakin's killing strike. He then tells Anakin that he truly was the Chosen One as Qui-Gon believed him to be, and tells him that he had done well. Anakin tells Yoda that they must go to the Senate to explain what had happened, but Yoda tells him that they don't need to, as R2-D2 shows up behind Yoda, revealing to have recorded everything just as Anakin told him to do, but also somehow being able to put it on the HoloNet for the entire galaxy to see. Anakin had not only brought balance to the Force, he had won the battle between the Jedi and the Sith. The Republic Senate would go on to pardon the Jedi and shut down Order 66, deactivating the inhibitor chips and causing the clones to immediately grieve because of their actions against the Jedi. Rex, now realizing that Fives had been right all along, goes on to remove his inhibitor chip and orders the rest of the 501st to do the same. The Republic would also elect Senator Bail Organa as the new Chancellor, right as Padme goes into labor. She gives birth to Luke and Leia, with Anakin by her side through it all. Yoda and Anakin immediately get to work on rebuilding the Jedi Order, and Anakin comes clean to Yoda about his marriage to Padme and about their children. Yoda, knowing that Anakin had brought balance to the Force as he was always intended to, not only allows Anakin to remain a Jedi, but he also grants him the rank of Master for his role in destroying the Sith. He further praises Anakin for not allowing his attachments to consume him, and asks him to teach this to the next generation of Jedi. When Yoda saw Anakin performing the act of killing Sidious, he had had a vision where he saw that the Jedi Order needed to change, specifically when it comes to attachments, and Yoda was able to come to the conclusion that emotions like love can make a Jedi stronger and more powerful, the same conclusion that Revan had come to in the days of the Old Republic. Not only this, but Yoda had seen that Anakin had finally been able to master the art of controlling his emotions while staying in the light. The Jedi would ultimately choose to separate from the Republic and move to the world of Tython after the destruction of the Coruscant Jedi Temple. Yoda is able to send a message to all Jedi across the galaxy, and many survivors return, including Baylan Skoll, Caleb Dume, Cal Kestis, Quinlan Vos, Karak Fila, Jocasta Nu, Eth Koth, Terran Malakos, Caloran Beck, Grogu, Gunji, Eno Cordova, and Sir Junda. Among the next generation of Jedi would be Luke and Leia. Ahsoka would also rejoin the Jedi Order after Anakin's victory over Sidious, and she would be given the rank of Knight. Mara Jade would be found at a young age, and Quinlan Vos would take her as his Padawan. Ezra Bridger would also be found on Lothal at the age of 7, and Anakin would take him on as his next apprentice, sensing a connection with the boy. Ezra goes on to become great friends with Luke and Leia. Leia would eventually train under Ahsoka, and Yoda would take Luke as his final Padawan. Anakin also supervises the training of his children, and passes on what he has learned about attachments to the rest of the Jedi Order. The no attachment rule is lifted after Anakin's fight with Sidious, and marriage is allowed within the ranks of the Jedi. As such, Anakin's marriage with Padme goes public. Padme eventually succeeds Bail as the next Chancellor of the Republic, as Luke and Leia become Jedi Knights at the age of 19. Before Luke and Leia's knighting ceremony, the Jedi are able to finally make peace with the Mandalorians, where Ezra meets Sabine Wren. The two become friends, and they eventually fall in love. Anakin sees this, and is reminded of Obi-Wan and his relationship with the Duchess Satine, and he chuckles to himself, remembering his old friend and mentor. Eventually, Yoda is also able to teach Anakin and the rest of the Council about how to retain their consciousness after death, and when Luke, Leia, and Ezra are 23 years of age, Yoda passes on into the Force at the age of 900. Days later, Leia announces her intent to marry Han Solo. Anakin and Padme are initially skeptical of Han, seeing as he is a smuggler, but they approve after getting to know him. Anakin even takes a liking to Han because of his piloting skills and offers to teach him some of his old tricks. Luke and Mara, now married, subsequently announce Mara's pregnancy with Luke's son, before soon thereafter, Anakin is made the Grand Master of the Jedi Order. However, despite all the happiness that goes on in the galaxy, despite the peace that the galaxy so enjoys, chaos brews in the black hole cluster known as the Maw, where she is finally ready to escape her prison and take her revenge on the Chosen One. Our story continues in the Maw, on Sinkhole Station, where the Force-sensitive beings known as the Mindwalkers were simply living their lives, unaware of the evil that was beyond the station, and deeper into the black hole cluster. Suddenly, though, a massive boom strikes the station, causing it to shake violently. Everyone scrambles to their feet when all of a sudden, everything goes dark. Then, we hear a massive explosion come from outside the station as a massive hole was created in the ceiling of the station, causing the oxygen to be sucked into space, and more than several people along with it. The Mindwalkers were already afraid, but what came next was worse than death itself, as a mysterious creature suddenly came through the hole as quick as a flash and blending into the darkness. Then, the lights flicker on and off, briefly shining on a creature that looked like a pale-skinned woman with silky white hair, a smile that went from ear to ear filled with sharp teeth, tiny black eyes, and with long, slimy tentacles for fingers. Everyone screamed in fear as they desperately tried to find out what the heck this was. However, this was no mere creature. This was Abaloth, the dark side entity that had been imprisoned in this black hole cluster for hundreds of thousands of years, and she, after thousands upon thousands of years of gaining power for herself, was finally ready to escape her prison, laughing maniacally as she made everyone there suffer in ways that no mere mortal can imagine, taking their Force energy and subsequently using the Force to cause Sinkhole Station to explode upon exiting it. Abaloth then finally exits the black hole cluster, making her way to Centerpoint Station and brutally killing a member of the bug-like Killik species and pouring some of her Force energy into them before she shapeshifts herself into a mortal woman from thousands of years ago, and with the Killik, leaves the station on a nearby shuttle without anyone even taking so much as a second glance. She would then go to the world of Ahch-To and use the Force to call any Jedi close to the system. More than several Jedi would come, including Taron Malicos and Quinlan Vos. Anakin, Grand Master of the Jedi Order, feels a dark disturbance in the Force, as if the galaxy itself is crying out in terror and that chaos is soon on the horizon. Something that has not happened since the death of Darth Sidious himself. Luke, Leia, Ezra, and the rest of the Jedi feel this as well, and Baylan Skoll, now a Jedi Master, is sent to investigate the source of this disturbance. Anakin senses that more than several Jedi have been caught in the crossfire, and he intends to find out what exactly he is up against. Baylan agrees, and then goes with his apprentice, Shin Hati, towards what they feel is the disturbance. What Anakin doesn't know, however, is that Baylan and Shin felt like this disturbance was calling to them. So, when Baylan and Shin get to Ahch-To, Abaloth kills them and possesses them, before a Venator jumps out of hyperspace, filled with Abaloth's possessed victims, ready to pick up Abaloth and her Jedi army. Meanwhile, on Alderaan, Han and Leia were on their honeymoon after having just been married after Anakin became Grand Master of the Order. They were sleeping peacefully in their hotel room when all of a sudden, a possessed Quinlan Vos attacks them, and Leia is suddenly forced to activate her lightsaber before a duel begins. Leia, due to her training under Ahsoka, is able to gain the upper hand over Quinlan, and he is swiftly defeated, but not before Quinlan shapeshifts into Abaloth and escapes. Han is shocked at what he sees, and Leia deduces that this was the great disturbance in the Force that she and the rest of the Jedi had felt earlier. Leia tells Han that they have to return to Coruscant, and they get into their ship, the Millennium Falcon, and jump into hyperspace. On Coruscant, Luke and his pregnant wife Mara Jade Skywalker were having a nice dinner with Padme, who was still the Chancellor of the Republic, when Anakin joins them. Anakin expresses that he is proud of the man that Luke had become, and that his unborn son was lucky to have a father such as Luke. Luke and Mara are appreciative of the compliments. However, this is when Han and Leia arrive, and Anakin feels it in the Force. Leia and Han burst into the dining room, and Anakin asks what is wrong. Han is the one to explain everything that had happened on Alderaan, and Leia expresses anger towards the situation. Han is also somewhat frustrated, but Anakin calms both of them down, explaining that he had sent 2 Jedi to take care of the threat. However, Anakin then feels in the Force that he had made a grave mistake in trusting Baylan and Shin. The HoloNet then goes live, and the Skywalkers watch in horror as they learn that the planet of Tatooine was under attack by a Republic Venator, and that Jedi were participating in this attack. Padme, knowing that the clones were never discarded after the war for security reasons, is especially horrified by this, as firstly, this was Anakin's homeworld, and secondly, the Republic would never attack an Outer Rim planet unless there was a good reason. Anakin is also horrified at this attack because firstly, he knew that the Jedi would never do something like this. Secondly, he never authorized this attack, and would never authorize an attack like this, especially on his homeworld. And thirdly, this meant that many Jedi had presumably fallen to the dark side. With this, the Skywalkers deduce that the Venator in question was hijacked by someone or something that was specifically targeting the newly crowned Grand Master. An emergency council meeting is held on Tython, where Anakin attends only on hologram. The council, after feeling the presences of each Jedi involved in the attack through the Force, discover that they had not in fact fallen to the dark side, and they presumably deduce that someone or something was using a form of mind control against them. The council then decide to send a Jedi squadron alongside the clones to deal with the threat. Anakin agreeing to lead the mission himself, and tells the rest of the council that he was going to the Republic Senate building to meet with the Chancellor. On the way to the Senate building, Anakin finds Ezra, who tells him that he plans on marrying Sabine Wren. Anakin chuckles to himself just before placing a hand on Ezra's shoulder, just as Obi-Wan had done with him all those years ago, and tells Ezra that he was happy for him. He tells him to continue to pursue this attachment, but to not let it control him. Ezra bows in respect towards his master, and the two of them make their way to the Senate building. An emergency Senate meeting is also held, but Padme has a much more difficult time getting to the Senate building than usual, because many citizens were gathered around the Senate building in protest of the attack on Tatooine, thinking that the Republic had actually authorized the attack. As Padme tried to enter the building, obscenities were shouted, including a chant that said, "Death to the Republic," or vile phrases like "Down with the Jedi." However, Padme gets in eventually and addresses the Senate. She explains everything to the senators, and seeing that she was beloved by the people and the senators, and that everyone knew about Padme's marriage to Anakin, whose homeworld was Tatooine, everyone was silent while she made her address. Padme calls for Anakin himself, who had just arrived at the Senate meeting, and also calls for the rest of the Jedi to help expose the culprit behind the attack, and to bring them to justice on behalf of the Republic. Anakin, having heard everything Padme had just said, agrees to do so, and he also addresses the Senate, promising that he would bring this threat down, and saying that he wanted every available Jedi on the scene immediately. Then, after the meeting is adjourned, Anakin, Luke, Mara, and Leia, alongside many other Jedi, including Ahsoka and Ezra, would prepare to get into 3 separate Venators in order to team up with the clone army for the first time in over 2 decades. with Anakin himself leading the mission. Before Anakin gets into his old Venator, Padme has a moment with her husband as she places her hands on his cheeks. She tells him that she loves him and asks him to protect their children and their future grandchild. Anakin, in turn, with tears in his eyes, promises to do so with his very life before getting into the Venator. Then, with Ahsoka by Anakin's side once again alongside Ezra, the fleet jumps into hyperspace for Tatooine. Meanwhile, on Tatooine, the Jedi and clones who were possessed by Abaloth, including Fox, Cody, and Greed, lay waste to the backwater world. Owen and Beru attempt to fight Abaloth and her forces, but when Owen lands a shot on Abaloth, she screams in agony, and in an incomprehensible display of the Force, fires start all over the planet as Abaloth let out a horrifying amount of Force energy that instantly destroyed anyone within a 3-mile radius, including Owen, Beru, and their daughter Shmi, who was named after Anakin's mother. Anyone further away instantly collapsed to the ground in agony as burnt sand turned into white-hot glass shards flew everywhere. Then, as the burst of Force light energy continued, Owen and Beru's hut is destroyed, and in its place, Abaloth used the Force to form a volcano, which at the end of Abaloth's outbursts, she would detonate by use of the Force, destroying everything and anything that was in the path of the eruption. Anakin and his fleet jump out of hyperspace and are beyond horrified at the destruction that their enemy had caused. But they pressed forward anyway upon Anakin's command. When they land, the clones would instantly pull out their blasters as the Jedi would at the same time ignite their lightsabers. Rex, having been promoted to the position of general of the entire clone army after all these years of service, would participate in this battle under Anakin once more, ready to serve once again under his Jedi commander, saluting him before pulling out his blaster and entering the battle. Abaloth's forces see the Jedi and Republic coming for them, and they all prepare for battle before charging at their attackers. The clones under Abaloth's control would be dealt with easily by the Jedi and clones. However, the Jedi under Abaloth's control would be much more difficult to deal with. Anakin, whose power had only grown during the past 2 decades, would dominate the battlefield, killing many of his enemies, clones and Jedi alike, as Luke and Mara take on Quinlan Vos, and Leia and Ahsoka take on Shin Hati. Mara tries to get through to Quinlan, seeing as she had been trained under him. But, having been killed when Abaloth possessed him, Quinlan refused to listen, and after he is able to defeat Mara, Luke plunges his emerald green lightsaber through Quinlan, saving the lives of both his wife and his unborn son. Shin, having trained with one of the most skilled fighters in the Jedi Order, puts up a good fight, but Leia and Ahsoka are able to deal with Shin easily, and Ahsoka ultimately kills her. However, what happens next is worse than Ahsoka had imagined, as Abaloth shows up from behind Ahsoka. When Baylan and Anakin find each other in the battlefield, Anakin and Baylan have an epic, ferocious duel in which Anakin expresses that he had made a mistake in trusting Baylan with the mission. Baylan, having always been skeptical of Anakin, similarly to how Mace Windu was skeptical, attacks in a blind rage. But Anakin, having learned to control his emotions, is able to kill Baylan with relative ease. This was when a creepy yet loving female voice called out to Anakin, challenging him to battle. That was when Anakin looked behind him, and he saw Abaloth's horrifying sight, holding Ahsoka hostage as she introduced herself as the beloved Queen of the Stars and the mother of Mortis, here to take revenge on Anakin and his loved ones for the deaths of her immortal family. Anakin feels an immense cold just by being in her mere presence, and he feels the near limitless power of this monster. However, Anakin stands horrified as Abaloth lifts Ahsoka by use of the Force, and plunges her tentacles through Ahsoka's mouth as Ahsoka attempts to scream in terror. And, just like all of her other victims, Ahsoka dies and is possessed by the Bringer of Chaos, before Ahsoka then attacks Anakin, who lifts his blade in order to block the attack. Anakin, believing that Ahsoka was somehow still alive, attempts to get through to her, tears in his eyes as he tells her to fight this monster that was inside of her. But Abeloth's grip on Ahsoka was too strong, and Anakin is forced to incapacitate her before he rushes Abaloth, angered at what she had done to his apprentice. The battle between Anakin and Abaloth was more intense and more ferocious than even Anakin's fight against Sidious more than 20 years before. In fact, it was so intense that the planet shook just because of how hard Anakin and Abaloth fought, and just because of the massive amount of power of both combatants. Boulders were thrown by both combatants. Lava was spewing from the planet via use of the Force, and lightsaber strikes were thrown by Anakin. Ezra, having dominated in the battlefield himself, attempts to help his master against Abaloth, but Abaloth uses a red form of Force lightning to knock Ezra out. Anakin sees this and is distracted by his rage, but Abaloth uses this to her advantage, and she is able to severely injure Anakin, resulting in a broken leg, a bloody nose, more than several broken ribs, and the loss of his cybernetic arm. Abaloth's attack was so powerful that it ended up ultimately destroying Anakin's lightsaber as soon as he hit the ground. From here, Abaloth is able to completely overwhelm the Jedi and Republic forces, killing everyone who wasn't able to escape her wrath, including Rex and even Wolf, and effectively leaving Anakin and Ezra among the last of the Jedi, and leaving Oppo as one of the last clones. Then, she overwhelms Leia, Luke, and Mara, before then taking them hostage as Anakin, still lying on the ground as a result of his injuries, sees this and is horrified, knowing that he wasn't able to keep his promise to Padme. Then, as Abaloth gets into her ship with Luke, Leia, and Mara in tow, Anakin closes his eyes, feeling the rage towards Abaloth for everything she's done, and then, after a moment, Anakin opens his eyes, a hateful yellow glow, as he looks towards Abaloth with an anger that he had not felt since Palpatine had killed Obi-Wan, and feeling the dark side of the Force flowing through him for the first time in over 2 decades, as he lets out a powerful Force scream while Abaloth ultimately escapes. Our story continues on Tatooine immediately after the events of Part 2. Anakin had just let out a powerful Force scream and slipped out of consciousness before Ezra wakes up, seeing the destruction that had just happened. He runs towards his master and calls for help. Oppo, having survived the destruction alongside several more members of the 501st, hears Ezra's call for help, and they all help Anakin to his Venator. They also take the unconscious possessed body of Ahsoka aboard the Venator as well, and restrain her. Ezra, now in command of the entirety of the remaining members of the Republic fleet, then gives the order to jump to hyperspace for Tython, and to contact Chancellor Amidala in order to have her meet them at the Tython Temple. The Venator jumps into hyperspace, and Ezra also decides to make a call to his soon-to-be wife Sabine Wren, asking her and her family to meet him on Tython, telling her that the Jedi need help, and that they need all the help they can get. Sabine tells him that she'll get everyone she can before telling him that she loves him. Ezra says that he loves her too, and the call ends, as whatever was left of the Republic fleet make their way to Tython. Meanwhile, on Coruscant, Padme was in her office, speaking with more than several senators, when all of a sudden, Colonel Yularen bursts into the Chancellor's office. The senators call for him to get thrown out, but Padme, knowing that Yularen had once served under Anakin, bids for the senators to let him speak. Yularen then informs Padme that the Republic fleet has made contact, and that they've requested for her by name to meet them on Tython. Padme asks for the status of the fleet, and Yularen gravely tells her that almost no one remains, and that only one Venator, filled with maybe 50 to 100 clones, remains of the fleet, and that Anakin and Ezra were the only Jedi that he knew of to come out alive. Padme, now fearing for the lives of her children and future grandson, asks Yularen if he knows anything as to whether or not they were alive. And Yularen says that he did not, but that Anakin was seriously injured. Hearing everything that she needed to, Padme demanded that her ship be prepared for immediate takeoff for Tython, before she contacts Han, asking him to meet her on Tython, informing him of the situation. Han agrees, and the Chancellor's staff act quickly before Padme soon jumps into hyperspace, fearing for the lives of her family. Meanwhile, on the Venator, Anakin was placed in a medical capsule during the trip to Tython, and Anakin has horrible dreams where he relives the Battle of Tatooine. He sees the destruction that took place on his own homeworld. He felt the deaths of Owen Lars and his family. He saw the deaths of many Jedi who were considered his friends, many of which died by his own hand. He saw Ahsoka, paralyzed with fear as Abaloth possessed her. He relived the trauma of his fight with Ahsoka's possessed body. He recalled the cold that he just felt just by Abaloth being there. He remembered the unfathomable power that this entity wielded. He remembered what she did to him, what she said that she wanted to do to him. And what was worst of all was that he remembered that his own children and pregnant daughter-in-law were now being held hostage by this monster, as he constantly relived the moment where Abaloth brought them onto her ship. At the end of the dream, he would again fight Abaloth in a dark void, and each time he fought her, he lost, and was forced to relive the dream in an infinite loop. Anakin felt true, genuine fear for the first time since the Clone Wars, and wondered if he would get out of this in time to save his family, or even if he would get out of it at all. On Tython, the remaining members of the Jedi Council, consisting of Tera Sinube, Luminara Unduli, Cal Kestis, Eth Koth, Eno Cordova, Sir Junda, Caleb Dune, Karak Infila, Farron Bar, Kit Fisto, and Appa Rancis were in an emergency council meeting because one of them, Luminara, had felt Anakin's presence in the Force go dark for the briefest of moments before he was ultimately nowhere to be found within the Force. And every single council member felt that Anakin had somehow fallen into a Force-induced coma, possibly at the hands of the enemy that he was facing. Chaos is about to ensue in the council chambers when the temple guards show up and inform the council that Jedi Knight Ezra Bridger has entered the system with the Republic fleet, and that Grandmaster Skywalker was with him, gravely injured. They also inform the council that Mandalorians have also arrived, and that the Chancellor of the Republic has arrived on behalf of the Grandmaster. The council quickly gives the order to let them all enter, and they head to the medical facility within the temple where Ezra was waiting for them. Kit Fisto is the first to ask what happened, and Ezra explains that the enemy they faced on Tatooine was too powerful for any of them, and that the fleet was nearly decimated. Ezra also explains that he had felt the power of the entity as he had tried to help his master against her, and if they don't do something now, that the fate of the entire galaxy would be at stake. Fisto explains that in order for them to do something, Anakin would have to wake up and heal from his injuries in a matter of hours. Ezra, in response, argues that those were hours that they did not have. This is when Padme and Han enter the room, saying that Ezra was right. Appa Rancis says that he appreciates Padme's concern for her husband, but that they'll have to wait for Anakin to wake up from his coma in order to do anything. Ezra instantly lashes out, saying that that wasn't even an option on the table at that moment. Padme then interjects, saying, "Then try something else. Anything else." Luminara then quickly interjects before Padme can say anything else, telling everyone that there was one way that they could get Anakin back into action. Padme then tells them to do anything and everything they could to get Anakin up, and tells them that that is an order. The Masters nod their heads in acknowledgement, and Luminara, who was the Master of the Order, asked everyone to place a hand onto Anakin, and even asks Ezra to join them. Ezra does so, and the Council begins to use the ability of Force Heal on Anakin, while also teaching Ezra how to use the ability. As the Council is doing this, Padme looks down upon Anakin, and kneeling beside his bedside, she spoke to him. She puts her hand in his hair and says that she didn't know what Anakin was facing, but that she knew that Anakin had the strength to prevail, and that he had the strength to save their family. She tells him to never give up in the face of this evil that was plaguing his mind. She tells him to not give in to whatever fear he was feeling, and she tells him that she loves him, that she knows that he could do anything he put his mind to, because he was the most amazing man that she ever knew, and the best Jedi in the history of the galaxy itself. Meanwhile, in Anakin's mind, he had just ended another loop of his dream, when Abaloth attacks him in the Dark Void. Anakin has just about given up, as Abaloth uses her red force lightning against Anakin, who uses his left hand to block it, just as Yoda had in Attack of the Clones. Suddenly, as this is happening, Anakin hears Padme's voice in the back of his head, telling him that she didn't know what Anakin was facing, but that she knew that Anakin had the strength to prevail, and that he had the strength to save their family. Hearing this, Anakin suddenly regained some of his strength, and used Tutaminis to throw the red lightning back at Abaloth, who dodged it. Padme tells Anakin to never give up, and to keep fighting. She tells him to not give in to whatever fear he may be feeling, and she tells him that she loves him, that she knows that he can do anything he put his mind to. She knew that he was the one who was going to save their children and grandson. Upon hearing this, something inside of Anakin completely snaps. He suddenly starts gaining the upper hand against Abaloth, who still puts up a good fight, but ultimately, Anakin defeats Abaloth, and he opens his eyes once more, returning to reality as he continues to lie on the medical bed, now completely healed except for his right arm, which still needed a new cybernetic replacement. Padme instantly hugs Anakin, who hugs her back as the council members try to ask Anakin what had happened. Anakin calls for his arm replacement, before then reminding the council about his experience on Mortis, and about the father, son, and daughter. Fisto asks what the meaning of the history lesson could be, but then Anakin reminds them that there was only a father and not a mother. And Anakin then explains that the mother is the very threat that the entire galaxy, not just the Jedi, were facing. The council is instantly petrified of the implications this could have, but Anakin calms them all down before calling an emergency council session in order to figure out how to kill this entity. The council agrees, and Padme, Ezra, and Han ultimately step out. When they close the door to the medical room, Sabine and her family arrive, and Ezra explains the situation, telling her that the Jedi needed the Mandalorians' help in order to defeat the Mother. Sabine agrees, but asks where they would be heading. Ezra would then gravely admit that he doesn't know just yet, and that Anakin had just woken up from a Force-induced coma. Sabine tells Ezra that she and her family would be outside training for the fight should he need her, and kisses him, telling him that she loves him before heading outside.
In the medical room, Anakin would order the council to use the Force in order to speak with both Qui-Gon and Yoda, so as to hopefully get more information about their enemy. They are successful, and Qui-Gon and Yoda appear to the council, explaining that the galaxy was in grave danger. Anakin agrees, telling Qui-Gon and Yoda that this was why they came to them. They needed the help of the Force Ghosts so as to gain as much information on Abaloth as they could. Both Force Ghosts admit that they did not know how to kill Abaloth, but that they knew where she had taken Luke, Leia, and Mara. Anakin's interest is instantly piqued, and Yoda and Qui-Gon explain that when the father learned what Abaloth had become, he had imprisoned her in a black hole cluster in the center of the galaxy, known as the Maw. And in the black hole cluster was the planet on which the Ones once lived, now known as a reality called Beyond Shadows. And that in order to get there, they would have to master a technique where the Jedi would have to separate their minds from their bodies, called mind walking. The technique was previously mastered by the Mind Walkers, the Force Ghost explained, but they were all killed when Abaloth made her escape from the Maw. They explained to the Council that Abaloth had many people who were possessed by her, and that they were planning an attack on 5 planets: Coruscant, Naboo, Corellia, Lothal, and Tython. They explained that this was all the information that they could provide, but that in order to fight Abaloth, Anakin would need a new arm and a new weapon. Anakin agrees with this, thanking Qui-Gon and Yoda for the information before they ultimately disappear. Anakin's arm replacement is then brought into the room, and Anakin's new arm is fitted. The Council debates as to what to do about the attack that Abaloth's forces were planning, but Anakin gives the order that the Council would stay on Tython, and that 10 Jedi Knights and 10 Jedi Masters would be sent to each of the other worlds. Ezra would be among those who go to Lothal, and the Mandalorians who were a part of Sabine Wren's family would be a part of the Lothal battle as well, as Anakin felt their presences in the Force. The Mandalorians would also split into separate groups for the assault. Padme would go to Coruscant to help there, and Han would take the Millennium Falcon to help on Corellia. Luminara asks Anakin what he is going to do, and Anakin says that after he retrieves a new kyber crystal and creates a new lightsaber, that he is venturing into Beyond Shadows alone. Reluctantly, everyone agrees, and Anakin leaves the medical room as he meets with Padme, Han, and Ezra, and Anakin hugs Padme. Anakin tells her where he is going, and he also explains what is going on. Han expresses visible concern for Leia's well-being, but everyone agrees to their roles in the assault against Abaloth, and Padme hugs him again, telling him that she loves him, and telling him to be careful. Anakin tells her that he loves her too, and that he promises to give his very life in order to save their family. Han and Ezra also wish Anakin good luck, before he then gets into his Jedi Starfighter and leaves for Ilum. Ezra then goes to Sabine's family and explains everything, before the Mandalorians separate, and with the Jedi Knights and Masters assigned to each group of Mandalorians, all except one group of Mandalorians all left Tython, with Ezra and Sabine's family headed for Lothal. Han gets into his ship and leaves for Corellia, and Padme leaves to return to Coruscant. On Ilum, Anakin lands on the planet and heads into the cave looking for his kyber crystal. He then hears Leia and Mara call out to him and runs towards where their voices had come from. However, then he sees Luke, who tells him that he had escaped Abaloth's grasp and that they didn't have much time. Anakin runs after his son, but then he hears his children and daughter-in-law scream out. Anakin runs a little further, and he sees Abaloth's horrifying form as she held them hostage once again. Anakin began to relive that moment once again in his mind, feeling anger towards Abaloth as he rushed to attack her. Abaloth dodges though, and begins to taunt Anakin, telling him that he would fail again as she pushed him over a cliff. Anakin seemed to fall several stories as he fell into a void. When he landed, he then hears Abaloth's voice telling him that he would never save his children, as 3 red lightsabers ignited in front of him, all ignited by Leia, Luke, and Mara. It was then that Anakin realized that this wasn't real. No, this was a test of the Force, just as any other youngling or any other Padawan received before receiving their crystal. But just because Anakin didn't use the dark side in more than 20 years doesn't mean that he hadn't mastered it. Because Anakin had mastered the darkness inside of him and acknowledged that it was there, as Luke, Mara, and Leia swung at him, all 3 with yellow eyes. But Anakin disposed of all 3 with barely a flick of his wrist. Then, Anakin is granted a vision in the Force, where he would see a mortal woman alongside the son and daughter. He then saw a mysterious pool and a mysterious font, which the woman swam in and drank from respectively, becoming Abaloth afterwards. Abaloth would then use her newfound power to make the daughter and son bow before her. But then, the father intervened, and everything goes white before Anakin is taken to another point in the past, to when the father, son, and daughter were killed. He sees himself during the father's final moments, the Mortis dagger right next to the father, as the father spoke his final words, and Anakin finally knew what the father had meant by his final words. Anakin had brought balance to the world of Mortis, and if he continued down this path, he would do it again for the galaxy. He would do it by defeating Abaloth. No, he would destroy Abaloth. As the father disappears, Anakin suddenly eyes the Mortis dagger, and he suddenly has a realization before the vision ultimately ends. Suddenly, though, a bright purple light shone at the end of the cave. Anakin knows that this was his new kyber crystal calling to him. He runs towards it and takes it, before leaving the cave and going back to his ship, where he had lightsaber parts, as was given to him by Huyang before he left Tython. He would then use the Force to build the very same hilt that he would have built as Darth Vader in the original timeline, before then igniting the blade, which revealed itself to be a beautiful purple glow. Then, Anakin would leave Ilum, but not for the Maw. No. Anakin would be trying to head for Mortis, as he finally knew how to destroy Abaloth for good. Meanwhile, in Abaloth's Venator, Leia, Luke, and Mara are restrained behind Abaloth as she stood on the bridge, and Luke demands that she let Mara go. Abaloth, however, refuses to do so, and she reveals that she has plans to recreate the family of the Ones, where Luke would claim the title of Prince of Darkness, and Leia would claim the title of Daughter of the Light, and Abaloth would claim the position that was previously held by the father. Both Luke and Leia instantly refuse, stating that they would rather die than join her, before Luke suddenly broke free from his bonds and attempted to attack Abaloth. Abaloth would then shock Luke with red force lightning and knock him against the wall. Abaloth would then refuse to give Luke, Mara, and Leia any sort of food or water as a result of their refusal to join her, and she would even go on to threaten the lives of both Mara and Luke's unborn son, as this was the reason why Mara was there with them, as leverage for Luke to fulfill his destiny and become the representation of the dark side. The children of Anakin Skywalker would then feel absolute horror as the Venator exited hyperspace and entered the Maw. The Venator would then land, leaving Abaloth to take Luke, Leia, and Mara onto her planet via her personal ship that she acquired from one of her victims. And she would send the Venator to Tython, while using the Force to send 4 other Venators to 4 other worlds: Coruscant, Lothal, Corellia, and Naboo. Back on Tython, after everyone else left, Luminara Unduli was the one leading the defensive and orders everyone to prepare for a massive attack. The Council, having just learned of Abaloth, were very unconfident in their abilities, but Luminara tells them that they have to do what they can to defend the planet as best as they could. It is then that a Venator exits hyperspace over Tython, and the Council realizes that Abaloth's attack had begun sooner than expected. Luminara then gives the order to prepare for battle, as all Jedi still within the temple went outside and ignited their lightsabers. Han exits hyperspace along with the Jedi and Mandalorians assigned to him, returning to his homeworld of Corellia for the first time in over 10 years. He lands his ship in a nearby shipyard, but then a Venator suddenly exits hyperspace and begins to open fire on the planet while also sending ships down for a ground assault. Han would get out his pistol and try to take cover, as the attack began. Sabine, her family, and Ezra would exit hyperspace over Lothal with the Jedi that were with them. And Ezra would ultimately be able to reunite with his parents, who he had not seen since he was a boy. He would introduce them to Sabine, and Ephraim and Mira Bridger were thrilled to see their son and to meet his soon-to-be wife. However, this was when the Venator from Abaloth's fleet arrived, and the Mandalorians and Jedi would prepare for battle in front of Ezra's old home. Padme would come out of hyperspace landing on Coruscant, and she would immediately give the order for a Venator to be sent to her homeworld of Naboo, another Venator to be sent to Lothal, another to be sent to Tython to assist the Jedi, and another Venator to be sent to Corellia. She then explains that she would be personally leading the defense to take place on Naboo, and she would be taking calls from all the other planets she listed. She places Colonel Yularen in charge of Coruscant's defense, before she leaves to meet the rest of the defense team on Naboo. However, it is just after Padme leaves that Abaloth's attack begins on Coruscant, and Yularen scrambles to get everyone ready to defend the planet. Padme arrives on Naboo in her personal ship and meets with the Mandalorians and Jedi there. When they're discussing the strategy for the planet's defense, however, is when Abaloth's fleet arrives, and everyone is forced to prepare for battle. In space, Anakin meditates in his ship as he tries to reach Mortis, with no success. After a half hour, he is visibly frustrated and even bangs his mechanical hand on the table. Then, the ghost of Yoda came to him, telling him that he knew how to get to Mortis. Anakin calms down and asks Yoda to teach him how to get there. Yoda tells him to close his eyes, to clear his mind, to concentrate on his memories on the Force planet, and to use the Force to take him where he needed to go. Anakin does so, and after a minute, he opens his eyes and finds himself on Mortis, exactly where the father had died, and he sees the Mortis dagger, retrieving it, before a white light overcomes him and he is teleported back to his ship. Anakin opens his eyes again, and he sees the Mortis dagger in his new mechanical hand. Yoda places a hand on Anakin's shoulder and says that he had done well, before then using the Force to grant Anakin some of his power in the Force, to give him some much-needed strength as he goes against Abaloth. Anakin thanks Yoda for his help, and Yoda even teaches Anakin the ability of mind-walking. But Yoda then tells him that he could not help with Abaloth any further. Anakin understands and bows respectfully to Yoda before Yoda disappears back into the Force. Anakin then sets a course for the Maw as he then jumps back into hyperspace. In the Maw, Abaloth takes Luke, Leia, and Mara to the volcano in which she gained her power, and takes them to the dark side nexus known as the Font of Power, and Abaloth would attempt to force them to drink from it, and when Mara's life comes under threat, Luke is tempted to drink from the font, tempted by the dark side like his father before him. But Leia is able to snap him out of it and convince him otherwise, using the Force to shield them all from the font's power. Abaloth is angered by this and uses her tentacles in an attempt to restrict Leia, but Leia is freed when both Mara and Luke use the Force to push Abaloth away from Leia, knocking her unconscious for a brief millisecond as the three Skywalkers attempted to escape, and they ran until they were no longer in range of the Font of Power. Abaloth, however, catches up to them, and the Skywalkers open themselves up to the Force, focusing on their feelings for their loved ones instead of the power of the font. And they attacked her with a blow that was so powerful that it would have killed a regular person. Then, both Luke and Leia plunged their lightsabers into Abaloth's chest, ending the battle before running to her ship to flee the Maw. On Tython, the Venator under Abaloth's control began to fire on the temple as the council members used the Force to create a shield around the temple. The Jedi Masters who were not on the council, as well as the Knights and Padawans who were capable of fighting, would fight Abaloth's forces in the ground assault. The Mandalorians would join them, and they would absolutely tear through opposition, before Abeloth's forces suddenly gained the upper hand due to being possessed by the entity, and also because the possessed body of Ahsoka woke up and escaped the Jedi's custody. However, another Venator then arrived, and the Jedi deduced that this is the Republic coming to help them. This boosts the Jedi's morale as well as that of the Mandalorians, and they regain the upper hand. The battle ends when the Republic Venator destroys the Venator under Abeloth's control. Abeloth's ground forces attempt to flee, but they are killed by more than several Jedi Masters, including several of which who were on the Council. Kit Fisto was the one to ultimately kill Ahsoka's possessed body for good. The Jedi had won the battle on Tython. At the same time on Corellia, Han and several Jedi Knights and Mandalorians would be overwhelmed by Abeloth's forces, and one of Abeloth's avatars even attempts to kill Han, but a Jedi, one of Leia's close friends, saves his life. Han then takes a moment to look around him, and he then sees a Wookiee, Chewbacca, being assaulted by Abeloth's avatars. Han acts quickly and saves Chewbacca, and Chewie quickly becomes a great ally in the fight against Abeloth, as he now owed Han a life debt. It is when this happens that the Republic Venator arrives on Corellia from Coruscant and turns the tide of the battle. The ground forces are quickly defeated by the Jedi and Mandalorians, as well as Han, Chewie, and the Republic clones. Then, Han gets back into his ship with Chewie and helps with the destruction of Abeloth's Venator, concluding the Battle of Corellia. On Lothal, Ezra and Sabine would make an incredible team against Abeloth's avatars. The Jedi and Mandalorians with them would also dominate the battlefield, gaining the upper hand quickly against Abeloth. However, they knew that they needed to destroy the Venator under Abeloth's control in order to secure victory, and Sabine's mother Ursa and brother Tristan would go in a ship in order to get the job done. When they get to the Venator, the Republic Venator arrives from Coruscant to help, and Ezra instructs them to not open fire on the other Venator, as two Mandalorians were working to destroy it. The commander of the Venator acknowledges Ezra's orders, and the guns and shields are taken out on Abeloth's Venator as the battle continues on the ground. Sabine orders the commander to fire upon the Venator, and the commander obeys when Tristan and Ursa leave the Venator. The Venator under Abeloth's control is quickly destroyed, and Ezra is the one to kill the last avatar of Abeloth that was on Lothal, concluding the battle. On Coruscant, Abeloth's avatars quickly overwhelmed the Republic military, as they were still scrambling to put up a defense. However, the Jedi and Mandalorians boosted the morale of the soldiers, and after some time, the Republic is able to gain the upper hand, destroying the Venator under Abeloth's command and defeating the ground forces. On Naboo, Padme and the Republic fleet are forced into battle with Abeloth's avatars and are quickly overwhelmed. Padme is almost killed by one of Abeloth's avatars, but a member of the Coruscant Guard saves her. When this happens, the Venator under Abeloth's control is suddenly destroyed. The Republic pushes the offensive on the rest of Abeloth's avatars, and the avatars are all eliminated quickly, and the battle on Naboo concludes. Meanwhile, on the outside of the Maw, Anakin goes to a bed that was in his ship, and for the first time uses the ability of mind-walking to enter beyond shadows. He stops at the Lake of Apparitions, where he sees the spirits of Ahsoka, now confirmed to him to be dead, and even the spirit of Obi-Wan. Anakin hugs them both, tears in his eyes as he did so. And Obi-Wan reveals that he was training with Yoda and Qui-Gon for many years on how to become a Force ghost, but that now was not the time for tears. Abeloth was here, and it was time to destroy her. A deep voice then rings out saying that he agrees. Anakin turns around to see the spirit of a Sith Lord who had suddenly showed up out of the blue. The Sith removes his hood, revealing himself to be Palpatine, and Anakin attempts to draw his weapons, but realizes that since his mind was separated from his body, he did not have a lightsaber, only the Mortis dagger. Palpatine then says that he didn't want to be here any more than Anakin did, but that there was only one way that Abaloth would be destroyed. The Jedi Chosen One and the Sithari together. Anakin reluctantly agrees, and Abaloth suddenly attacks Anakin from behind, having seen the dagger. Anakin would then use the Force in order to transport himself, Palpatine, and Abaloth to Mortis, and it is successful, as Anakin is temporarily placed back into his body in the process. Anakin ignites his lightsaber as Palpatine attacks Abaloth with Force Lightning, but Abaloth uses red Force Lightning in return. Anakin attempts to choke the entity, but she uses the Force to throw Anakin off of her. Palpatine and Abaloth are then locked in an intense fight, as Palpatine uses his knowledge of the Force to his advantage. However, Palpatine has seriously underestimated her power, and Abaloth knocks him out with a blast of lightning. Anakin would then duel Abaloth once again, using Tutaminis to his advantage, as Abaloth pressed for the dagger, but Anakin would not let her have it. Qui-Gon's Force Ghost then came to him, and he told Anakin to do what he had to. He told Anakin to bring balance to the Force once again, as he was always meant to do. Anakin then embraces both sides of the Force in this moment, and Abaloth is severely injured as a result of a powerful attack from Anakin. However, Abaloth, desperate, still kept coming, taunting Anakin that his beloved family would die, just as he had once killed her own family on this very planet all those years ago. Anakin presses forward, angered by these threats, but Abaloth once again uses Anakin's anger to her advantage, as she then throws him to the side. It is then that Palpatine, knowing how powerful Abaloth was and having just woken up, made a choice, as Abaloth then transported the three of them back to Beyond Shadows. Palpatine then seized his moment and held the entity down with the Force as he shocked her with his lightning, as he got as close to her as he could. Palpatine then calls for Anakin to do it, just as he had called for Anakin to kill Dooku all those years ago on the Invisible Hand. Anakin sees what Palpatine is trying to do, and Anakin uses the dagger to kill both Palpatine's spirit and Abaloth, as the dagger stabbed right through Palpatine's lower back and right into Abaloth's heart. The entity would shriek in agony, and it is a long, long moment before Abaloth would then disappear into the lake forever, taking the spirit of Palpatine with her. It was done. Anakin had once again brought balance to the Force. Obi-Wan and Ahsoka give Anakin a proud smile, and Anakin nods at them before he is transported back to his ship, where he found Luke, Leia, and Mara standing over him. They tell him that Abaloth was dead, and Anakin confirms this to them, telling them that he was the one to kill her permanently. The Skywalkers then returned to Coruscant, where they were welcomed back as heroes. Several months after Abaloth's death, Luke and Mara would go on to have their son, who would ultimately be named Jin after Qui-Gon Jinn, and he would be inducted into the Jedi Order upon a midichlorian test. Ezra and Sabine would marry in a ceremony that united Jedi and Mandalorian, and saw the union of the two peoples. Sabine would later become pregnant, and it was decided that Sabine and Ezra's future baby would ultimately become the first Mandalorian Jedi since Tar Vizsla. Leia and Han would ultimately become pregnant with twins 1 year after Abaloth's death, named Jason and Jaina Solo, who would also immediately be inducted into the Jedi Order. Padme would step down from her role as Chancellor after the twins were born, and she would ultimately live with Anakin and the rest of her family on Tython. Anakin would continue to lead the Jedi as the Force willed it, and he would never tell anyone of Palpatine's role in killing the entity, as he feared that this would cause contention amongst the Jedi, and he would become the most powerful Jedi,
the most powerful Force wielder that the galaxy had ever seen. 5 years after Abaloth's death, Anakin was meditating in his quarters as Padme slept, when he heard a voice he had not heard in a long time. He opened his eyes, and he sees the Force ghost of Obi-Wan Kenobi, who told Anakin, "Well, at least I was able to save your life one time." Anakin chuckled before embracing Obi-Wan in a hug, happy tears flowing down Anakin's cheeks as he did so.